I knew something was wrong the moment both my children arrived on the same day. Gregory and Caroline hadn't been in the same room for nearly 3 years, not since Edward's funeral. Yet here they were sitting stiffly on the living room sofa I'd reupholstered just last summer, exchanging meaningful glances as I poured tea into my best china cups. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation," Gregory began the moment I sat down. At 53, my son had grown to resemble his father in appearance, but not in warmth. As the CFO of a tech company in New York, he wore success-like armor designer suit, expensive watch, and that perpetually distracted expression of someone calculating profits and losses. "What about my living situation?" I asked, stirring honey into my tea. Caroline leaned forward, her architect's eye, visibly cataloging every corner of the Victorian home her father and I had lovingly restored over 4 decades. "This house is too big for you, Mom. Too much maintenance, too many stairs. It's becoming unsafe." "I manage just fine," I replied, though my arthritic hip twinged as if on cue. "Elena helps with the heavier chores." Gregory's lips tightened at the mention of my part-time nurse. "That's another thing. These healthcare costs are eating into your savings. We've been looking at some retirement communities." "Retirement communities?" I interrupted. "I have no interest in moving." "Mom, be reasonable." Caroline sighed. "You're getting well, you're not as sharp as you used to be." I set my teacup down with a sharp clink. "Excuse me." Gregory exchanged another look with his sister before turning to me with the patronizing patience he typically reserved for difficult board members. "Mom, you forgot Thanksgiving last year. You called me on Black Friday asking when we were coming." "That was one mistake," I protested, heat rising to my cheeks. I had mixed up the dates on my calendar. "And last month you left the stove on overnight," Caroline added. "Mrs. Chen told me when I called her." Walter Chen had indeed come over one morning to find my tea kettle scorched after I'd absent-mindedly left the burner on. I'd been embarrassed, but hardly considered it evidence of dementia. More importantly, I wondered when Caroline had started calling my neighbors to check up on me. "We've already spoken to a realtor." Gregory continued, pulling a business card from his pocket. "The market in this neighborhood is hot. This house could easily sell for over $1 million, which would more than cover your care for the rest of your life." The words hit me like a physical blow. They'd discussed selling my home without consulting me. I stared at my children, these strangers who had once been small enough to hold in my arms, now coolly planning to dispose of my life's largest investment. "Let me be clear," Gregory said, his voice taking on the edge I recognized from his teenage years when he'd argue for a later curfew. "You're getting senile, Mom. We've both noticed it. You can't live alone anymore, and we think it's time to make decisions while you can still participate in them." Senile. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and accusatory. At 78, I had some senior moments, certainly, but senile. I'd published a literary analysis piece in an academic journal just 4 months ago. I ran a book club at the local library. I completed the New York Times crossword most days in pen. Caroline must have sensed my resistance. She softened her tone, reaching over to pat my hand in a gesture that felt more condescending than comforting. "It's not that we think you're incapable, Mom, but prevention is better than crisis management. Wouldn't you rather move somewhere with support systems in place before something serious happens?" "Like what?" I challenged, a broken hip, forgetting to take my medication. "I've lived in this house for 40 years. I raised you both here. Your father died here. This is my home." "And it's a lovely home," Caroline agreed smoothly, "which is why it will sell quickly and provide you with excellent care options." "I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. This conversation is over." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Actually, Mom, it's not. We've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Matthews next week to discuss your cognitive status as your medical proxies." "Medical proxies are for emergencies," I interrupted, "not for adult children who want to override their parents' wishes." Caroline's face hardened. "This isn't a negotiation, Mom. We're your medical proxies. If we determine you're not competent to make decisions, we have options." The threat was thinly veiled. My late husband Edward had insisted we put proper documents in place, healthcare proxies, powers of attorney just in case. Now those safety nets felt like traps. "I believe I asked you both to leave," I said quietly. After they departed with promises to continue this discussion soon. I sank back into my chair, hands trembling. Through the bay window, I watched them talk intensely in Gregory's luxury car before driving away. They hadn't even stayed for dinner. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself, suddenly chilled despite the warm spring day. The beautiful home that had always been my sanctuary now felt vulnerable, as if under siege. More disturbing than their plans for my house was their apparent belief that they could simply take control of my life, rearrange it to suit their convenience under the guise of concern. As twilight settled over the garden Edward had so lovingly tended, I found myself speaking aloud to him, a habit I'd developed since his passing. "They think I'm losing my mind, Ed. Our own children want to sell our home and put me away." I could almost hear his practical response. "Then you'd better prove them wrong, Jude, and watch your back while you do it." Edward and I purchased this house when we were both professors at Boston University, he in economics, I in English literature. It had been a wreck then with peeling wallpaper and ancient plumbing, but we'd seen its potential. Every weekend for years, we stripped, sanded, painted, and restored, turning the neglected Victorian into a showpiece home where we raised our children and hosted department gatherings. The house held our history in every corner, the growth chart penciled on the kitchen doorframe, the study where Edward had written his seminal text on behavioral economics, the garden where I'd taught both children to identify birds and wildflowers. After Edward died of heart failure 5 years ago, many friends had suggested I downsize, but the thought of leaving the space still filled with his presence was unthinkable. My health had declined somewhat recently. Arthritis made the stairs challenging on bad days, and I'd fallen once last winter, resulting in a mild concussion. That's when Gregory had insisted I hire help, and Elena Rodriguez had entered my life 3 days a week. Elena was a godsend, a nursing student working toward her advanced degree, smart and capable with a gentle manner that never made me feel infirm. At 34, she was raising her 9-year-old son Diego alone, balancing motherhood, her studies and work with remarkable grace. Unlike my children who called dutifully on holidays but rarely visited, Elena listened to my stories with genuine interest, laughed at my academic jokes, and treated me like a person rather than a problem to be managed. The morning after Gregory and Caroline's ambush, I was still unsettled when Elena arrived. She found me in the kitchen, struggling to open a new bottle of pain relievers for my arthritis. "Bad day for the hip, Mrs. Blackwell?" she asked gently, taking the bottle and opening it with ease. "Bad day for family relations," I replied and found myself recounting the previous evening's conversation. Elena's expression darkened as I spoke. "They cannot force you to sell your home," she said, her slight accent more pronounced in her indignation. "You are completely competent." "Apparently not in their estimation," I sighed. Gregory mentioned forgetfulness, but honestly, who doesn't have moments at my age? Edward used to joke that he'd forget his head if it wasn't attached. Elena hesitated before speaking again, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Blackwell, have your children always been so interested in your finances?" The question gave me pause. Both Gregory and Caroline had comfortable incomes, but neither had achieved the financial security Edward and I had built through decades of careful investing. Since Edward's death, Gregory had offered increasingly frequent advice about my portfolio, suggesting changes that I'd mostly resisted. "They've never been quite this direct," I admitted. "But Gregory did try to convince me to sell some investments last year for better returns," he said, though his suggestions seemed risky to me, and Caroline has mentioned several times how her architecture firm is struggling with the economic downturn. I remembered Caroline's comments about an oceanfront property she and her husband had been eyeing in California. "Just a dream for now," she'd said wistfully, during Christmas dinner. Maybe when we retire. Elena nodded thoughtfully. My mother in Mexico experienced something similar with my brother. He became very concerned about her welfare when he learned she owned her house outright. The implication hung between us too uncomfortable to voice aloud. Surely my own children wouldn't, but then I remembered the realtor's card. The already made plans. Caroline's hard expression. A chill settled in my chest. What would you advise, Elena? I asked quietly. Document everything, she said without hesitation, and get a second opinion about your cognitive health from a doctor they don't know. Most importantly, speak with a lawyer about protecting your assets. The practical advice steadied me. Elena was right. I needed to approach this strategically rather than emotionally. I might be their mother, but this was no longer about family feeling. This was about autonomy. Would you help me make some calls? I asked. Elena's smile was determined. Of course, Mrs. Blackwell. Let's start right now. As Elena helped me compile a list of specialists and attorneys, I thought about Edward's occasional comments about our children. They've never known real struggle. He'd observed once after Gregory complained about having to fly commercial instead of private. Maybe that's our failure as parents. I'd dismissed his concerns as overly harsh then. Now I wondered if he'd seen something in our children that my maternal instincts had blinded me to. Over the next few weeks, a disturbing pattern emerged. Gregory began calling daily, often inquiring about my medications, or asking pointed questions clearly designed to test my memory. What did you have for breakfast yesterday? Mom? He'd ask casually. Or who was the last person to visit you? Followed by, are you sure about that? Caroline convinced my longtime physician, Dr. Matthews, to discuss my condition with her, a breach of confidentiality that left me furious, but strategic enough not to confront yet. I discovered these conversations only because Elena overheard Caroline on her cell phone in the garden, speaking to Dr. Matthews while I napped one afternoon. She's insisting she's managing, but we both know that's not sustainable. Caroline had said, we need to move quickly before she does something financially reckless. That evening, I had Elena help me record a video diary entry. Today is April 15, 2023. I said clearly to the camera, I am Judith Blackwell, age 78, former professor of English literature at Boston University. I am making this recording because I have reason to believe my children are attempting to have me declared incompetent in order to sell my home. I am of sound mind, as anyone who knows me can attest. I proceeded to list the day's news headlines, recite a Shakespeare sonnet from memory, and work through a complex logic puzzle Elena had brought me. If anyone questioned my mental capacity later, this would serve as evidence. Meanwhile, Gregory happened to visit whenever I had banking appointments, insisting on accompanying me. Twice, he interrupted conversations with my financial advisor to clarify points I'd made, subtly undermining my credibility. What Mom means, he'd interject smoothly, is that she's concerned about liquidity, not long-term growth. Given her situation, accessibility trumps return. My situation. As if aging were a terminal diagnosis. Following Elena's advice, I documented everything. I used a leather-bound journal Edward had given me for our 40th anniversary, recording dates, times, and exact quotes. I also secretly recorded some conversations on my phone, a skill Elena's son Diego had taught me with amused patience. You're catching on faster than my classmates, Mrs. Blackwell, he'd said, showing me how to activate the voice memo feature. My mom says you were a professor. What did you teach? English literature, I'd replied. But apparently this old dog can still learn new tricks. Diego had giggled at that. You're not old, Mrs. Blackwell. You're vintage like those cool record players my friend's dad collects. His innocent comparison had made me laugh, a welcome relief during increasingly tense days. Most disturbingly, I discovered my children had begun spreading concerns about my mental state to neighbors and friends. Walter Chen mentioned during our weekly chess game that Gregory had asked him to keep an eye on me and report any unusual behavior. My book club coordinator revealed that Caroline had suggested they simplify the reading selections for my benefit, as if I couldn't handle Kazuo Ishiguro. I'd fumed to Elena later. I taught the remains of the day to undergraduates for years. The final straw came when Elena discovered an email exchange between Gregory and Caroline that they'd inadvertently printed on my home computer. Elena brought the pages to me with a troubled expression. "I found these in the printer tray," she said softly. "I think you should read them." The emails outlined a clear plan, push for cognitive testing, with a specialist whom Gregory had spoken with. Accelerate the house listing with their preferred realtor, and identify a memory care facility with appropriate security measures to prevent wandering. Most chillingly, they discussed how to divide the proceeds from my house sale, after-care expenses, with Gregory arguing he deserved a larger portion to compensate for managing Mom's situation. I read the pages twice, my hands growing steadier rather than shakier. Anger clarified my thinking wonderfully. "These are my children plotting to steal my home and effectively imprison me," I said, looking up at Elena, "and I'm not going to let that happen." Elena nodded, her expression a mixture of sadness and determination. "What would you like to do, Mrs. Blackwell?" I squared my shoulders, feeling more like Professor Judith Blackwell than I had in years. "I'm going to fight back, and I need your help." My first step was to undergo a comprehensive neurological evaluation with a specialist recommended by Abigail Monroe, my old college friend who had become a respected elder law attorney. Dr. Patel conducted extensive cognitive testing over several sessions, declaring me sharp as a tack, with some normal age-related memory changes, but nothing remotely approaching dementia. "You display exceptional verbal reasoning and abstract thinking, Mrs. Blackwell," Dr. Patel said, reviewing my results. "Consistent with your background as a professor of literature, I'd be delighted to defend these findings against any contrary opinions." I left her office with the detailed assessment in my handbag, feeling armor-clad with empirical evidence. Armed with Dr. Patel's assessment, I met with Abigail to discuss legal options. At 68, Abigail had lost none of her formidable intellect or direct manner. We'd bonded during freshman English at Wellesley, 2 scholarship students amid wealthy classmates. Unlike me, who'd followed a traditional academic path, Abigail had entered law school after raising 3 children, specializing in elder law after her own parents' difficult final years. "They've overplayed their hand, Judith," she said, after reviewing my journal and the printed emails. "But they're counting on you being too conflict-averse to fight back. Are you prepared for what this might do to your relationship with your children?" I thought of Edward, who had warned me for years that our children had grown entitled, that our generosity had fostered expectation rather than gratitude. I defended them then. Now I wondered if he'd seen what I had been unwilling to acknowledge. "What relationship?" I asked bitterly. "They view me as an asset to be managed, not a mother to be loved." Abigail nodded briskly. "Then let's discuss countermeasures. First, we need to revoke their healthcare proxies and powers of attorney. Immediately, I'll draft new documents naming someone you trust implicitly." My mind went immediately to Elena, who had shown more genuine concern for my welfare in 6 months than my children had in years. But would she be willing? "Next," Abigail continued, "we should establish a trust for your assets with an independent trustee. This will make it much harder for them to challenge your financial decisions." As Abigail outlined legal protections, I found myself thinking about Elena's situation. She worked multiple jobs to afford a tiny apartment in a mediocre school district while studying to advance her nursing career. She sent money monthly to her parents in Mexico. And despite these pressures, she treated me with unfailing respect and kindness. Meanwhile, my children, raised with every advantage, educated at top universities that Edward and I had paid for, were scheming to displace me from my home for their financial benefit. An idea began to form. Abigail. I interrupted her explanation of revocable trusts. "What if I wanted to gift my house to someone? What would be the legal implications?" Abigail raised an eyebrow. "Substantial, depending on the value and circumstances. Who did you have in mind?" My nurse, Elena Rodriguez. To her credit, Abigail didn't immediately dismiss the notion. Instead, she asked careful questions about Elena's character, our relationship, and my motivations. I explained how Elena had become not just a caregiver, but a trusted friend, how she epitomized the values Edward and I had tried to instill in our own children. I know it sounds impulsive, I admitted, but it's not. I've been observing Elena for months. She's dedicated, honest, and hardworking. She deserves a break, and My voice caught unexpectedly. I need an ally. Abigail. Someone in my corner. Abigail's expression softened. I understand, Judith, but we need to proceed carefully, not just to ensure this arrangement benefits you both, but to protect against inevitable challenges from Gregory and Caroline. It would need to be structured carefully, she continued. Perhaps a life estate for you with the deed transferring to Elena, ensuring you have the legal right to remain in the home for your lifetime. We'd need to address tax implications, potential challenges from your children. I want to do it, I said firmly, not just to thwart Gregory and Caroline, though I won't pretend that isn't satisfying, but because it feels right to help someone who has genuinely helped me. Abigail studied me for a long moment. You always were a romantic. Judith, even in English Lit seminars. But in this case, your instincts might be sound. Let's structure this properly and make it happen. As we began drafting documents, I felt a sense of purpose. I hadn't experienced since retirement. Edward would have approved, I thought. He had always advocated for using our resources to help those who would make the most of opportunities. It's not about charity, he'd often said. It's about investing in potential. Elena Rodriguez had potential in abundance, and unlike my children, she had earned my trust. Preparing my countermove required careful choreography. First, I had a frank conversation with Elena explaining what I wanted to do and why. Her initial reaction was stunned disbelief. Mrs. Blackwell, I cannot accept such a gift, she protested, eyes wide. It is too much. It's my house to give, I replied, and I'd rather it go to someone who values both it and me, not someone who sees both as commodities. Elena's eyes filled with tears. But your children have made their position clear. I took her hand. Elena, this isn't just generosity, it's self-protection. I want to remain in my home, and I need an ally I can trust. The legal arrangement would guarantee my lifetime residency here, while ensuring the house eventually goes to someone who deserves it. Elena shook her head, struggling with the magnitude of the offer. I don't know what to say. This would change everything for Diego and me. His school, our future. Think about it, I urged. I don't need an answer today, but know that my mind is made up about one thing. Gregory and Caroline will not dictate my future. With or without your involvement, I intend to secure my home. It took several conversations over the next week, but Elena eventually agreed, her practical nature, recognizing that this arrangement would secure not only my future, but her son's as well. Diego could attend better schools, have a stable home, and Elena could focus on completing her advanced nursing degree without constant financial pressure. I will honor your trust, she promised solemnly, and I will care for this house as you have with love and respect for its history. Next came the legal work. Abigail created a tightly structured deed transfer with clear provisions for my continued residence and care. We established a small trust to cover home maintenance and taxes. I revoked all powers previously granted to my children and named Walter Chen as my healthcare proxy, with Elena as backup. Throughout these preparations, I maintained a facade of increasing confusion for Gregory and Caroline's benefit. I forgot phone calls, asked repetitive questions, and appeared increasingly dependent on their guidance. Each concerned glance they exchanged fueled my determination. When everything was in place, I invited them both to dinner, suggesting it was time to discuss those arrangements you mentioned. They arrived promptly, Caroline clutching a folder of brochures for senior living facilities. Gregory with document holders. I recognized from his briefcase. Elena was present, ostensibly preparing dinner, but actually recording the conversation, as we had arranged. Abigail waited in Edward's study, ready to join us at the appropriate moment. I had set the dining room table with Edward's grandmother's china and crystal glasses, a formal touch that seemed to please Caroline, who had always coveted these family heirlooms. "Such a lovely table, Mom," she commented, running a finger along the gilt edge of a plate. "I remember these from holiday dinners." "Yes, too bad they'll be collecting dust in storage soon," Gregory added with forced cheer. I smiled placidly. "Well, that remains to be seen. Please sit down." Elena has prepared a wonderful meal. We made stilted small talk through the soup course, Gregory's children's accomplishments, Caroline's new commission, designing a tech executive's vacation home. Neither asked about my activities or interests. "I've been thinking about what you both said," I began as Elena cleared the soup bowls. "About the house being too much for me." Gregory leaned forward eagerly. "I'm glad you're seeing reason." "Mom, we found an excellent community in Brookline. Full care, beautiful grounds. And we've had interest from several buyers already," Caroline added. "The realtor thinks we could list next month." "That sounds very efficient," I said mildly. "You've been busy on my behalf." Caroline had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "We only want what's best for you, Mom." "I'm sure you believe that," I replied. "But I've made my own arrangements." Gregory frowned. "What arrangements?" "I've transferred ownership of this house to someone who has demonstrated genuine care for my well-being." I pressed the intercom button on my phone. "Abigail, would you join us, please?" Abigail entered with professional composure, introducing herself as my attorney. Gregory immediately stiffened. "What's going on here, Mom?" Caroline demanded, her voice rising. "Why do you have a lawyer?" "Because I needed protection from my own children," I said quietly, sliding Dr. Patel's assessment across the table. "I've undergone comprehensive cognitive testing. As you can see, I am entirely competent to manage my affairs." Gregory barely glanced at the document. "This doesn't change anything. You're still not safe living alone in this house." "I won't be alone," I replied. "Elena and her son will be moving into the upstairs guest suite. The house has been transferred to her with provisions ensuring my lifetime residency." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Caroline's strangled exclamation. "You did what?" "She can't have done that," Gregory said to Abigail, ignoring me entirely. "She's not competent. We're her healthcare proxies." "Not anymore," Abigail interrupted smoothly. "Those documents were revoked last month, and I assure you I verified Mrs. Blackwell's competence thoroughly before executing any transfers." Gregory's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. That woman has manipulated you." He jabbed a finger toward the kitchen where Elena stood quietly. "She's after your money." Unlike my children, who so generously planned to institutionalize me and sell my home without my consent. I withdrew the damning emails from my folder. Perhaps you recognize these discussions about my house proceeds. The color drained from Caroline's face as she recognized the printouts. Gregory snatched them from my hand, scanning them quickly. "You had no right to read our private emails," he sputtered. "You had no right to print them on my computer," I countered. "Just as you had no right to discuss my personal medical information with my doctor, spread rumors about my mental state to my friends, or plan the liquidation of my assets against my wishes." Caroline turned to Abigail, switching tactics. "This nurse has taken advantage of an elderly woman's vulnerability. There must be laws against this kind of undue influence." "There are indeed laws against undue influence," Abigail agreed. "They're the same laws that protect elderly parents from children who attempt to seize control of their assets under false pretenses of cognitive decline." She smiled thinly. "Should you wish to challenge Mrs. Blackwell's decisions in court, I would welcome the opportunity to present the substantial evidence of your coordinated efforts to declare her incompetent for financial gain. Gregory stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This isn't over, Mom. That woman is using you. No, Gregory, I interrupted, rising to face my son. You and Caroline were using me, or attempting to. Elena has shown me nothing but respect and genuine care. She has earned my trust while you have squandered yours. You'll regret this, Caroline said, gathering her things. When she takes everything. She already has everything I wanted to give her, I replied, which is more than I can say for the children I raised, who somehow never learned the values your father and I tried to instill. They left in a storm of threats and slammed doors. As the sound of Gregory's car faded, Elena emerged from the kitchen, her face pale. Are you all right, Mrs. Blackwell? She asked softly. I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. I believe I will be, I said, and please, after all this, I think you should call me Judith. The following year brought transformations I could never have predicted. Elena and Diego moved into the upstairs rooms, bringing new life to the old house. Weekend mornings now included Diego's soccer games, where I cheered from the sidelines with Walter Chen. Evenings often found us gathered in the kitchen that had been silent for too long, sharing meals and stories. Elena insisted on maintaining the formality of our initial relationship, taking care of household chores and monitoring my health, but gradually, the lines between employer, employee, and family blurred. I helped Diego with his English essays. He taught me to use Instagram. We planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, and I passed on the gardening knowledge Edward had shared with me. My grandmother grew tomatoes like these in Mexico. Elena told me one afternoon as we harvested the summer bounty. She would be so happy to see Diego learning these things. With secure housing and reduced expenses, Elena accelerated her studies, completing her nurse practitioner degree. I attended her graduation ceremony, feeling a pride that matched anything I'd experienced with my own children's accomplishments. Gregory and Caroline initially made good on their threats consulting attorneys about challenging the property transfer. But Abigail had constructed an airtight arrangement, and the documented evidence of their behavior made even aggressive lawyers advise caution. Eventually, the legal rumblings subsided. Caroline was the first to extend an olive branch, calling on my birthday with stiff congratulations that gradually softened into genuine conversation. The house looks good, she admitted reluctantly. Elena seems to be taking care of it. She is, I confirmed, and of me. I still don't understand why you didn't come to us first. Mom, we're your children. I sighed, wondering if she'd ever truly understand. Being someone's child doesn't automatically make you their advocate. Caroline, that has to be earned. Aunt Gregory remained distant, though he sent a Christmas card signed by his family, a small gesture that nonetheless gave me hope that wounds might eventually heal. On warm evenings, Elena and I often sat on the front porch watching Diego play with neighborhood children on the lawn where my own children had once played. Do you ever regret it? Elena asked me once. Your decision about the house. I considered the question seriously. I regret that it came to this. I said finally, I regret that my relationship with my children deteriorated to the point where such measures were necessary. But the decision itself? No. Some might call it revenge, but I prefer to think of it as restoration. Putting things right. Elena nodded thoughtfully. In my culture, we believe that family is who loves you, not just who shares your blood. Edward used to say something similar. I replied, smiling at the memory. Family is a verb, not a noun, he'd tell the children. It's what you do, not who you are. As twilight settled over the neighborhood where I'd spent my adult life, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since Edward's death. My house, our house remained filled with love and purpose, not converted to cash and divided between those who valued it least. Some might question giving such a valuable asset to someone who had been in my life for a relatively short time. But I've spent my career analyzing stories, and I recognize authenticity when I see it. Elena's care was never performance or calculation. It was simply the natural expression of a generous spirit. In the end, I didn't sign over my house to spite my children, though their schemes certainly sparked my decision. I did it because at 78, I finally understood what Edward had tried to teach all of us: that true wealth isn't measured in property or portfolios, but in the connections we nurture and the good we leave behind. My children called me senile for making this choice. Perhaps there's a certain madness in choosing family by heart rather than blood. But as I watched Diego grow taller and Elena flourish in her career, both secure in the home that will one day be fully theirs, I'm certain it's the sanest decision I've ever made.